The imperial court had assembled in full ceremonial array, the kind of gathering that happened after major military campaigns concluded successfully, where the empire's power structure became visible, and where honors were distributed according to carefully calculated hierarchy. The recent campaign had been significant. 3 systems defended against Korathi incursion. What intelligence had suggested could become a full-scale war had instead become a decisive Velrathi victory that forced diplomatic negotiations and ended the immediate military threat. The ceremony was attended by everyone who mattered. Senior generals who had commanded the campaign at the strategic level, admirals who had coordinated fleet operations across multiple systems, noble houses whose resources had supported the war effort diplomatic corps who would now manage the peace negotiations. They were positioned according to their role and rank, the people who commanded at the highest levels closest to the center where Queen Seriveth would enter, others arranged in descending order of importance. The expectation was clear. The Queen would publicly recognize the commanders whose strategic decisions had produced victory, would formally honor the noble houses whose support had made the campaign possible, would perform the ceremony that reinforced how the empire's hierarchy functioned during both war and peace. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes was present because all military personnel who had participated in the campaign had been ordered to attend, not because he expected to be recognized, but because attendance itself was part of military protocol. He was positioned at the edge of the hall, among other junior officers and enlisted personnel, in the section reserved for those whose presence was required, but whose individual recognition was not anticipated. He'd done his job during the campaign: signals intelligence analysis, pattern recognition in enemy communications, threat assessment based on fragmentary data. Important work, but not the kind that usually reached imperial attention. Certainly not the kind that resulted in public recognition during victory ceremonies, where the focus was on strategic command. He stood at attention with everyone else in his section and waited for the ceremony to begin. Queen Seriveth entered through the ceremonial entrance with the formal procession that major court events required: guards in ceremonial armor, advisors maintaining formal positions, the apparatus of imperial authority made visible and traditional. She moved toward the center of the hall where the senior commanders were positioned. Everyone expected the ceremony to proceed according to established protocol: formal recognition of strategic leadership, commendations for exceptional command decisions, the honors that would be documented in military histories and that would shape political standing for years afterward. But Queen Saraveth didn't stop at the center. She continued walking, past General Kethros, who had commanded the army groups that had defended 2 of the 3 systems, past Admiral Varus, who had coordinated the fleet engagements that prevented Korathi forces from achieving orbital superiority, past the nobles whose names were associated with centuries of imperial service. Her path was taking her toward the edge of the hall, toward the section where junior personnel were positioned. People began to notice that something was deviating from expected protocol. The senior commanders exchanged glances, uncertain whether this was intentional or whether the Queen was acknowledging someone they had failed to identify. The nobles were processing whether this meant someone unexpected was about to receive recognition that would shift the careful political calculations that governed resource allocation and favor. The junior officers and enlisted personnel in the section she was approaching were uncertain whether to remain rigidly at attention or react to the unprecedented situation of the Queen moving directly toward their position. She stopped in front of Marcus. He was standing at attention like everyone else in his section, but he wasn't expecting recognition. He was a signals intelligence analyst. His work during the campaign had been technical and strategic rather than visible. He'd never spoken to the Queen, had no connection to imperial politics beyond his role as a military officer doing his assigned duties. Queen Seriveth looked at him for a moment, not with the formal assessment that public recognition typically required, but with something more direct and personal. Then she embraced him. Not the formal gesture that protocol provided for military commendations. That was a hand on the shoulder, words of recognition spoken loud enough for witnesses to document. This was an actual embrace, personal, immediate, the kind of gesture that Velrathi culture reserved for family or for bonds that transcended formal relationships. The entire hall went silent, not the attentive silence of ceremony watching power being performed. The profound silence of hundreds of people simultaneously processing something that violated their understanding of how imperial authority operated. In Velrathi culture, a public embrace from the monarch was not casual gratitude. It was the highest form of personal honor. It acknowledged bonds of loyalty and trust that existed beyond rank or position. It declared that the person being embraced had earned recognition that transcended what formal commendations could capture. Queen Seriveth didn't explain, didn't make a speech to the court about why she'd broken protocol or what Marcus had done to warrant this unprecedented recognition. She released the embrace, looked at Marcus with an expression that carried weight he didn't fully understand, and said quietly enough that only he and those immediately nearby could hear. "You saved more than you know. I wanted you to understand that I know what you did." Then she turned and addressed the court, not explaining what had just occurred, but continuing with formal recognition of senior commanders as though the unprecedented gesture was simply part of the ceremony rather than something that required justification or defense. After the ceremony concluded, Marcus was approached by multiple people trying to understand what had happened. His immediate commanding officer, Captain Revis, pulled him aside. "Lieutenant, I need to know if you had prior relationship with Queen Saraveth that wasn't documented in your service record." "No, sir," Marcus said. "I've never met her. Never had any direct communication with Imperial Command beyond standard military intelligence channels." "Then what did you do during the campaign that would warrant?" Revis paused, searching for how to describe what they'd all witnessed. The highest form of imperial recognition being delivered publicly before any senior commander received formal honors. "I did my job, sir. Signals intelligence analysis." "That's not an answer that explains what just happened, Lieutenant." "I don't have a better one, sir." But Marcus knew. He knew exactly what he'd done that no one else knew the full scope of. 3 weeks before the campaign's conclusion, he'd identified a communications pattern in intercepted Korathi transmissions that suggested something beyond normal tactical coordination. The intelligence was fragmentary, pieces of encrypted communications that individually meant nothing, but that together formed a pattern Marcus recognized as preparation for a specific type of operation. A decapitation strike. An attempt to eliminate command authority by targeting leadership rather than military forces. He'd reported it through channels. Standard procedure: analyst identifies potential threat, reports to intelligence command. Command assesses and decides whether to escalate. Intelligence command had assessed it as low-confidence intelligence. The pattern Marcus had identified was circumstantial. There wasn't enough concrete evidence to justify high-level alert or operational changes. His report was noted but not acted on. But Marcus believed the threat was real, and he had capabilities that his position technically gave him access to, but that he wasn't authorized to use without direct orders. He could monitor and decrypt certain classified Korathi communications if he used protocols that were reserved for extreme circumstances. Protocols that required authorization from command level, because using them revealed to the enemy that their secure communications had been compromised. Marcus used them anyway. He spent 18 hours monitoring and decrypting Korathi command communications, confirming what the fragmentary intelligence had suggested. The Korathi were planning to target Queen Saraveth's flagship during a command transit that was supposed to be secured, but that the Korathi had somehow learned the timing of. He reported it with enough supporting detail, specific targeting coordinates, timing windows, force composition, that it couldn't be dismissed as low-confidence speculation. The threat was escalated immediately. The Queen's transit was rerouted. Security was increased. The assassination attempt hit empty space where the flagship was supposed to be but wasn't. Marcus had violated his authorization limits to confirm a threat that official intelligence channels had dismissed. He'd done it knowing that if he was wrong, if the threat turned out to be nothing, he would face discipline or discharge for exceeding his authority and compromising sensitive collection methods. He'd been right, and that decision had saved the Queen's life. 2 days after the ceremony, Marcus received summons for private meeting with Queen Seriveth, not formal audience in any ceremonial space, but private consultation in secured quarters with minimal security presence. She explained what the public embrace meant and why she'd chosen to deliver it the way she did. "You prevented my assassination, Lieutenant Hayes. You identified a threat that Intelligence Command had assessed as low confidence and not worthy of immediate action. And you violated your technical authorization limits to confirm that threat because you believed it was real, and that confirming it mattered more than following your authorization boundaries." "I was doing what the intelligence suggested was necessary, Your Majesty," Marcus said. "Even though you knew that using those protocols without direct authorization could result in discipline or discharge if your assessment was wrong." "Yes, Your Majesty. The risk seemed worth it if the threat was real." "That," Queen Saraveth said, "is the definition of loyalty that matters most. Not following orders when orders are clear and consequences are managed, but making the right decision when the situation is ambiguous and the cost of being wrong is personal." She moved to look out the window at the city below. "I could have given you formal military honors during the ceremony. Medal for exceptional intelligence work, commendation for threat assessment that exceeded normal analytical standards, promotion to higher rank. All of that would have been appropriate recognition within normal military frameworks. But what you actually did transcended normal frameworks," she continued. "You made a decision that saved my life based on incomplete intelligence and despite lacking formal authorization, because you believed the threat was real and the personal risk was worth taking. That kind of judgment and loyalty is what makes empires survive, not the formal structures and command hierarchies, but the people who make the right call when the situation is ambiguous and the cost is personal." She turned back to face him. "The embrace declared that publicly. It established that you have my personal trust not because of rank or political connections, but because you demonstrated character when it mattered most. That's recognition that changes how everyone in the empire relates to you, because they understand that your loyalty has been acknowledged at a level that formal honors can't reach." "I understand, Your Majesty," Marcus said, though he was still processing the full implications. "You will find," Saraveth said, "that your position within the military and political structure has changed despite your rank remaining the same. Your assessments will reach command level without the normal filtering. Your recommendations will be weighted differently. When there are questions about ambiguous threats, you will be consulted because I've established publicly that your judgment on such matters is valued." "I'm not interested in political advancement, Your Majesty. I just want to do my job." "I know," Saraveth said. "That's part of why the recognition matters. You're not trying to leverage what you did for advantage. You made the right call because you believed it was right, not because you calculated it would benefit you. That makes you more valuable, not less." Over the following months, Marcus learned exactly what the public embrace meant in practice. Formally, his rank didn't change. He remained a lieutenant assigned to signals intelligence work. But everything else changed. His access expanded. His analytical reports now went directly to Intelligence Command rather than being filtered through multiple review layers. When senior commanders needed assessment of ambiguous intelligence, He was brought into briefings that would normally only include senior analysts. The commanders who had initially been confused or resentful about his receiving recognition, before they did gradually came to understand what had happened, that Marcus had identified and confirmed a threat to the Queen that would have succeeded if he hadn't exceeded his authorization to verify it. The resentment transformed into something closer to respect, not because of his rank, but because he demonstrated the kind of loyalty and judgment that transcended hierarchy. The political dimension was more complex. Various factions wanted to establish relationships with him, because the Queen's public embrace had established that he had her personal trust. He declined those approaches consistently, making clear he had no interest in court politics. Ironically, this made him more valuable to the Queen, someone with access and trust who wasn't trying to leverage it for political advantage or factional benefit. During one of his regular intelligence briefings, which now happened directly with Queen Seriveth rather than being filtered through command structure, she said something that clarified what the ceremony had represented. The generals and admirals who were recognized after you earned their honors through strategic command, they made good decisions that produced victory. Their recognition was appropriate and valuable. But their decisions were made within established frameworks, she continued. They had authority, resources, clear chains of command. The risks they took were military and strategic rather than personal. What you did was different, she said. You made a decision that saved my life while lacking formal authority, based on incomplete intelligence, knowing that if you were wrong you'd face significant personal consequences. That kind of judgment, recognizing when the situation requires exceeding your authorization, because the alternative is unacceptable, that's what the embrace acknowledged. She looked at him directly. In public, in front of everyone who matters in the Empire, I declared that you have my trust at a level that rank and politics can't achieve. That's not something that can be gained through normal advancement or careful maneuvering. It can only be earned through demonstrated character when it matters most. I understand, Your Majesty. Do you? Saraveth asked. Do you understand that you've become someone whose judgment I value more than most of my senior command staff, despite your junior rank? That when I need intelligence assessment that isn't filtered through institutional caution, you're who I ask. That the embrace established you as someone whose loyalty has been recognized at the highest level. I'm starting to, Your Majesty. That's good, she said. Because the Empire needs people like you, people who make the right call when the situation is ambiguous and the cost is personal. Not just in intelligence work, but in every aspect of how we operate. The embrace wasn't just recognition of what you did. It was a statement about what kind of loyalty matters most. Years later, when military historians documented the campaign and its aftermath, they would note the unprecedented moment when Queen Seriveth walked past her decorated generals and embraced a junior officer who had never been publicly recognized before. Some would interpret it as purely personal, the Queen honoring someone who had saved her life. Others would understand it more completely, as a declaration about what kind of service the Empire valued most. Not just following orders or commanding successfully within established frameworks, but making the right decision when the situation was ambiguous and the personal cost was high. Marcus would remain in signals intelligence throughout his career, advancing in rank but never seeking command or political position. What he had was more valuable. The Queen's demonstrated trust, earned through a decision that saved her life, and acknowledged through an embrace that declared to the entire Empire that his loyalty mattered at the highest level. In front of the entire court, she had walked past her generals and embraced a silent soldier. And in doing so, she had changed how everyone in that room understood what recognition meant.